Well, hello. I am the Reverend Gowan Pamphlet, pastor now of one of the largest churches in the United States of America. It is called First Baptist Church here in Williamsburg. We are now very, very excited as a congregation, and I being the pastor of hopefully moving into our first building. We never have had a church building. As a congregation, we started about 1776 on a plantation called Green Springs, about 5 miles outside the city limits of Williamsburg. And it was probably best in 1776 as a Baptist congregation that we did start on Green Springs, because we could not have started in the city of Williamsburg because Baptists were not recognized as a legal denomination. Neither were the Methodists or the Presbyterians or the Quakers or the Dunkers, the Lutherans, the Amish, the Mennonites. And by God, as we say, you best not be Catholic either, because they weren't even allowed to come into places like Virginia and 9 of the other colonies. The only places that I know of Catholics worshiping legally is actually 2 colonies at the time, was Pennsylvania and Rhode Island. But here in Williamsburg, my church has grown tremendously in number. I grew up here in Williamsburg, and I found the Baptist movement to be a movement that would be satisfying for the people in which I wanted to preach to and give the gospel to. And of course, that would mainly be the enslaved people here in Williamsburg. And then, of course, later on, I would have some Indians in my congregation and free blacks that were joining my congregation. Even have some Irish and Scottish people attending my congregation now. But in those early years of 1776, it was mostly enslaved people, and we were really going outside on that plantation to start what we call the First Baptist congregation. As I said, we grew pretty fast. That was kind of the beginning of the war years. In fact, we started our first service about 2 weeks after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and grew quite a bit between 1776 and, of course, 1781, which was the Battle of Yorktown, which winning that war, winning that battle, really gave us really hope that one day we will become a legal denomination, and then, of course, we as Baptists, a legal church. And because of the winning of the war, we did. The Virginia Statutes of Religious Freedom by Mr. Jefferson in 1786 was to kind of set the tone for all denominations. And now in these United States of America are now denominations of God, and all will be recognized as churches of God. You can even choose your denomination now that you wanted to be a part of. No longer would you have to be part of just one denomination like it was before the war 1776. You could not be of any of the denomination other than the Church of England. That was the only established church of acceptance, and it was not a church that you would join or a denomination that you would join. You were born into it, because you were born in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Delaware, Maryland, eventually New York, and of course Massachusetts and Connecticut. These places had state churches, and they would be the only denomination allowed for you to worship. But again, because of the war and winning of the war 1776 and the Virginia Statutes of Religious Freedom, we were starting now to be recognized as equal churches of God, no matter your denomination. And then, of course, with the Constitution now by Mr. James Madison, and always favored Mr. Madison in the fact that he went to a Presbyterian seminary and the College of Princetown, and that's why we will get in that Constitution a law now said the freedom of religion. And then, of course, I really love the very fact that we got this promise, more of a promise than a law, called the Wall of Separation of Church and State. And that's a very, very important a law, or I should say promise, because it's actually a covenant, meaning as long as we are the United States of America, we'll never be ruled by one denomination again in government. And that's a very, very important statement for us here at First Baptist. Well, my congregation grew to about 200 members by the 1781, and I know I had to move them because of the Battle of Green Springs before the Battle of Yorktown. I took my 200 people and we moved to a place called Raccoon's Chase. That's right off the road to Jamestown, right at the mouth of College Creek. We grew pretty fast there by 1793, actually the year of my free paper, as I was born a slave and grew up in most of my life enslaved here. 1793 would be my time I would get my free paper. And then I always say that made me a very dangerous man here in America, an ordained slave Baptist preacher, and now I'm an ordained free Baptist preacher with a large congregation, and of course by 1798, I have over 610 members, and we're now about to move into our first church on Nassau Street. The Cole family donated us 2 city lots, and we're looking forward to that. Well, anyway, I can go on to talk to you all day about my good news, but I understand that Mr. Smith has some questions from you all, and I'm ready to listen to your questions and have a nice little talk to you.
Reverend Gowan Pamphlet, thank you, first of all, so much for being here today in the city of Williamsburg and talking to all of us who find ourselves curious as to the direction of not just religion in this country, but the country itself. The first question comes from Tina, and you had just mentioned that you have some new property that has been donated by the Cole family here in Williamsburg, in fact, right in the middle of the city. Tina is wondering, how did you raise funds for the building that is being built on that property?
Oh, Tina, you'll find my life to be a very, very miraculous life, a life of miracles, actually. In fact, I didn't have to raise not 1 cent or shilling or pence to get the building built. I have in my congregation now of 610 members, at least 45 carpenters. And on that property that the Coles gave us on Nassau Street was a barn. And what my carpenters are doing now basically is, they're going to retool that barn into a nice church building. And so I'm looking forward to that. And as a matter of fact, my congregation consists of most of the skilled labor that's living in Williamsburg, of enslaved people, and some that are living outside on plantations and some of the farms. They're coming to my church, highly skilled. So it's just about every occupation that you can think of that's part of Williamsburg's labor force is in my congregation. So there's really not a lot of things I need to pay for monetarily wise because I have the talent of those individuals in my congregation.
It's a community effort.
Yes, absolutely. And I like that word community because that's what we are. We are now a kind of a new community that's moving into Williamsburg, but we are part of the wider community of the people that live in Williamsburg, and people are very excited about the church coming into town, and they are volunteering their time to help us get set up, and I'm just very excited.
Well, and so are the people, not just your congregation. I've heard you mention something about We have a hospital here, of course, in Williamsburg by Dr. John de Sequeira, but your church might also be considered a hospital. Have I heard you correctly say this before?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. You heard correctly, Mr. Smith. What my denomination of the Baptist Church here, First Baptist, is more than what people would say a church building. We're like the hospital, the public hospital, right across the street from where we were going to be located. It was a place for healing for people that mainly had mental problems and some other things that they were healed by the doctors there. Dr. D. Sequeira, who actually was one of the very few Jewish doctors here in Williamsburg. But my church is like that hospital. I call it the hospital for the heavy laden and the weak and weary soul, as most of my congregation are the enslaved people here in Williamsburg. My church, I look at it as a place for them to come to be healed from many of those problems they have with the institution of slavery being still here in this country, which I pray every day that we will see go away. But it's a place that they can come and through the great word of God, because I always call the medicine from the Bible and the stories from the Bible medicine for the soul. And applying that medicine helps for the healing of their soul. So they look at it as a place that they can come and let us know when they have certain problems, and I will help them get some healing medicine to heal that wound they might have gotten during the week.
It's a necessary thing. We all need a place to and a space for healing.
Yes.
Thank you for providing that.
Thank you.
We have a question from Gary talking about healing, and Gary's wondering if there have been any repercussions from the city or friends or people that you know of after creating this new church.
Gary, I haven't had any real objections. Of course, everybody's not going to be excited to have Baptists anywhere nearby, because they say, first of all, we're too loud. And by the way, we do get kind of excited when we start praising God and that type of thing. So we're kind of unusual as far as that kind of church in this neighborhood now. But people understood over time that much of the fighting of the War of Independence in 1776 was that one day we will have an opportunity to be able to have churches that might be different than one another, might not worship like the Methodists, might not worship like the Presbyterian or like the Jewish temple synagogue. We might be worshiping, but we're all the same because we're all Americans. I mean, that is the real important thing we need to understand. What the war should have done was bring us together as a people. One day we will get rid of these institutions of bondage, and one day we will realize that the best way for us to understand one another, that we can be all on an equal plane, equality in the eyes of God. That's what I like to say all the time.
We have several questions around the Baptist faith and meeting houses versus churches, so we're going to try to get into some of those. Aaron Squire wants to know if you attended any other churches, any other religious sects, meeting houses prior to being a Baptist, prior to this new pathway you find yourself on.
Well, Aaron, you must be a prophet, because yes, I have. I have had a lot of opportunities to go to different denominational churches, Presbyterians. I've had the chance to be in some of their meetings, some Methodists. Had a chance to be in some of their meetings. I was actually baptized and Christianized an Anglican, so I attended Brewton Parish Church before I became a Baptist. So one thing I have to say, that during the time of the First Great Awakening, and by the way, those fires of the burning of the First Great Awakening burned 40 years, starting in the 1730s, all the way through the war years of 1776 those Great Awakening Revival meetings. In those meetings, you had every denomination represented. Preachers of different denominations will be sitting together upon the stage, preaching one behind the other. It really didn't matter for the first time that I have never known of what your denomination was. You could be a Baptist, you could be a Methodist, Presbyterian, a Quaker, a Dunker, a Lutheran. It really didn't matter. People just put aside their differences, and we became, again, one people. And that is what we need to understand. We are now the United States of America, and we should be a united people of America.
So it occurs to me that we might need to take a step back, and that is to cover, first and foremost, perhaps the distinction between a meeting house and a church. And does now being a recognized religion or through the statute for Virginia for religious freedom, this allowance for you to call yourself a church, for you to meet in a church, what are the benefits that you gain from being a recognized religion versus what we had, which was a communion, a union between church and state?
That's a very good question. Before 1776, we were called dissenters, and we were dissenting from the only one denomination allowed for marriage and worship, and that was the Church of England. Therefore, as a dissenter, we weren't given the recognition of being equal to the Church of England, and therefore, before 1776 and even before 1781, we weren't even allowed to marry the people in our congregation. So say, for instance, you wanted to be married by a Baptist or be married by a Methodist or a Presbyterian preacher. You can be married by them, but the marriage was not recognized by the government. So therefore, you really would not have had a legal marriage. And so one of the huge differences now, because of winning the war of 1776 and formulated in the new government, the United States of America, now we have now been given recognition that we are a church, no matter your denomination, you are a church of God, and your marriages now are very much accepted by the government here, and they are legal marriages. Everybody's on equal plane, no matter your denomination, your religion. That's why we call it in the Constitution freedom of religion. And therefore, there's no more separating us from to be any different than any other religious group or denominational group.
So thank you for that that more recent history lesson in your life. I suppose it's not history if you've lived it, but it might be new information and history for some of our audience and viewers. So that being said, now that we understand what it means to be a church, a recognized religion, Len has a question. And Len is wondering, is there a current network of the Baptist churches during this time across the country? Are there conferences, annual conferences? Are you meeting or talking with other Baptist groups around the country?
Oh, yes. Len, what we have is what we call the associations. Associations sort of a mixed bag. It's associations, sort of a seminary type of places where preachers can go and learn the teaching of different scriptures and doctrines and theologies. The association is everywhere, and most of your denominations now have associations of regional churches that have formulated these associations, and they are linked now throughout the United States, over seas in the Caribbean and South America, some now in Nova Scotia and Canada, some down in the Caribbean. Yes, we are definitely through the association and the conventions. The conventions of the denominations are where most of all your denominations in your state now will be going to learn about what's going on in other places. And at every convention that you have, and that's a yearly venture to some particular location within your state, and we're reading reports of what's happening overseas, like in England, what's happening in Africa, what's happening in Nova Scotia or down in Jamaica. We just are very well connected.
So we have a question from Sean, and this is, I think, the first question we received, and is a great point to talk about inspiration. And Sean is wondering who or how or what, maybe, event in your life inspired you to this pathway, to become a preacher, to be the Reverend Gowan Pamphlet that you are now.
Well, many things inspired me. I believe one of my most moving inspirations was the very fact that when I was baptized by a preacher by the name of the Reverend Jeremiah Walker back in the 1760s, and when he first arrived in Virginia, he was the first Baptist I ever heard preach. I didn't know what a Baptist was. I had never heard a Baptist preacher. But he came to Williamsburg, and of course he was arrested by the authorities, the sheriff here, because he was preaching on the Duke of Gloucester Street with about 100 and some people surrounding him. He was preaching, but he didn't have a license, because that was the requirement back then, before 1776. You cannot preach, no matter your denomination, other than the Church of England. You could not preach without having the proper license. If you cannot show the sheriff that license, that means you're preaching illegally, and you're going to be arrested. So where I really met the Reverend Jeremiah Walker was when he was arrested and taken to the jailhouse. And of course, it was the jailhouse in Williamsburg that I came upon him one night, and he asked me a question, and I never could figure out how he knew, because I had never told him I had been a slave. But he asked me a question. He said, "Gowan, do you want to be free?" And of course, I've always wanted to be free, but I never thought it would come to someone like the Reverend Jeremiah Walker. But he was talking about not necessarily my freedom from being an enslaved person here, but he was talking the freedom of my soul, because he said, they say they might own your body by their laws, but they can't own your soul. And he showed me a way through that Bible that I am just as much part of the kingdom of God as any other person of any other color. And I would say it was probably him, because he was the one that baptized me over the James River. And I tell you, that was when I started having dreams after that baptism, and that was a dream of me becoming a preacher. And at first I was really scared. I tell you the truth. I first had the first dream of, I couldn't really figure out who the person was speaking to, people as far as the eye could see. And I kept having the dream and kept having the dream. And then finally it came revealed to me who that person was speaking to all those people. It was me. And first thing I said to myself, I'm a dead man. A Negro preaching? That's not normally allowed here in this society. But God saw fit that he just broke down all of those walls of partition. And I could look around, I would find myself being ordained, the first black preacher in America, being ordained in 1772, and will go on to start my church in 1776. I'm a miracle.
The first black preacher in America.
Yes.
And is this the first Baptist church in America?
Well, in fact, I'm the first black preacher of any denomination.
Uh-huh.
Bond or free, and I was enslaved at the time. Got permission from Mrs. Vobe, Jane Vobe, my owner. She owned the King's Arms Tavern. That's the tavern I grew up, right on the Duke of Gloucester. Later on, had to change the name to the Eagle Tavern once they signed the Declaration of Independence, 1776. But yes, she allowed my ordination, and I think Mrs. Vogue had undergone a change herself because normally you don't leave the Church of England, but for whatever reason, Mrs. Volpe left the Church of England 1760s and she started attending Presbyterian meetings. And I think because of her change from the pulpits of the Church of England to the pulpits of the Presbyterians, I think she understood when I came to ask her for the blessings of ordination in 1772, she gave me the nod.
Well, we have a question from Angie about the makeup of your congregation. And Angie is wondering if your congregation is made up mostly of slaves or African Americans, freed African Americans, enslaved. What is the general makeup of your congregation?
Angie, am I correct?
Angie, yes.
Angie, I would love for you to come one Sunday to my congregation. I think you'll be quite impressed. First of all, I got the largest congregation, I believe, now in the United States, over 610 members. And I would say over half of them, more than half of them, are enslaved people, have always been enslaved, more enslaved than free people in my congregation. I have free blacks in my congregation. I have some Indians in my congregations, and even some whites. I have some Irish and Scottish people that have joined my congregation too. But it's never been a problem by the slave owners especially, because one thing I do require, any enslaved people attending my congregation, they must have legal passes. They have to have the proper pass given by their owner for their attendance. And I've always required that because I've never wanted my church to have the troubles of society by not following the rules. And so I would make sure that anyone that's attending my congregation would have the permission from the knowledge of their owners by having their passes and making sure they are properly done.
So even though in Virginia we might have some semblance of religious freedom, there's still a hill to climb and obstacles to leap over in the forms of owners giving a pass to even be able to attend a church like yours.
Oh, and by the way, my church service on Sunday, it lasts all day. We start about 6 o'clock in the morning on Sunday, and we don't end until the sun goes down. So giving that pass is a huge sacrifice sometimes, because owners are allowing that labor normally to attend my services. And for me, Mrs. Volpe, every Sunday giving me off to attend my congregation from 1776 up until the time she passed away in 1786. David Miller, her son, took over her estate, and I was part of the estate, but he still allowed me every Sunday off to be with my congregation. And so it depends on the owner. Some owners are not as generous as my owner was to allow me to pastor a church now, and now that I'm free, I don't have to worry about that.
Well, I think we had a few questions around that sentiment, and so I think Tina and Holly will be interested in the answer you just gave. And Angie, if you come to Reverend Pamphlet's service on Sunday, be sure to pack not just a breakfast, but a lunch and a dinner as well. Reverend Pamphlet, we only have time for a few more questions, but we have an interest in your name. Can you talk about the name you were given, the name you took, how you got to the name Gowan Pamphlet?
Oh, that's a very good question. Well, my first name, Gowan, I was given, of course, at birth by my mother. She gave me the name Gowan. My mother was one of the cooks at the King's Arms Tavern. Her name was Grace. She gave me that name. My mother was able to read, like I was able to read later on, allowed to read, especially to do my chores and then some of taking care of some of the books, account books there at the King's Arms Tavern. So I learned to cipher, and I learned to read. I learned to write very early, and my mother learned to read. She had to, of course, have to read some of those recipes for cooking. But she gave me the name Gowan because of her having read a book by Sir Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. I don't know if you know about that story about Sir Arthur. One of the knights was named Gowan, and I had always believed that I was just more than what people had said, and that was a piece of property. Some people say, well, Gowan, your only property, not that important. But I've never ever have just believed I was just only a piece of property. I had always felt I was more than that. And when my mother gave me that name, I think it was the best thing she ever did, because I had always thought I was a kind of knight anyway. And I love horses. I used to groom a lot of the horses that we had at the stables at the King's Arms, and I used to ride I started riding horses about at the age of 5 years old, and I always pretended I was a kind of a knight. Pamphlet, the last name I took, and I took Pamphlet as the last name actually in January of 1776. And it was at the King's Arms Tavern where I heard the Pamphlet. A man from Philadelphia came in to the tavern about dinner time, and that was 2 o'clock at dinner time, and read to the people in the dining room a new pamphlet called Common Sense by Thomas Paine. And I had heard about Mr. Paine 2 years prior to having heard that pamphlet read, 1784, and I had always known, and people had always had rumored, that he was what they call an abolitionist. That means a person that did not believe in the institution of slavery and wanted to try to end the institution of slavery. In fact, he started the first abolitionist society in April of 1774 in Philadelphia. And so when I heard the pamphlet Common Sense read, I knew my name needed to be Pamphlet. And I think it's much of a code, you know what I mean? Pamphlet have news of all types in it. And since now I was a preacher, I'm carrying the good news.
And we thank you for carrying the good news every day at your hospital as it's being built.
And for the heavy laden and the weak and weary soul.
That's right. So if you're weak and weary, come here. You can visit the site as it's going under some new changes momentarily. Well, sir, we thank you for our time. We're at the last question, and since we've been talking about your name, I think it's probably appropriate to continue and end there. We know that you are now a reverend. We know that you are now freed. We know where both Gowan and Pamphlet came from. Would it then be appropriate to call you one of those famous pamphleteers?
Well, I definitely know why I believe you said that, because, again, pamphleteers were people that you would find that would be like newspaper, gazette people. They mainly tried to get you to subscribe to a certain pamphlet or certain types of pamphlets. And so they were called pamphleteers. You hear them all the time, almost at every place you would go around in every now state. It used to be every colony. You have these pamphleteers, and I just believe that after hearing Common Sense and the pamphlet, Common Sense being what I think one of the greatest pamphlets ever written by humankind, Mr. Thomas Paine, was such a powerful effect on the creation of the United States of America, because Common Sense, the pamphlet, was used to help recruit a lot of the Continental Army that fought the 6 Years' War against Great Britain. I want to say this. Mr. Thomas Paine, Common Sense, had certain ideals. In fact, the ideas that we fought the war for liberty, freedom, equality, and justice. Now, Mr. Paine meant for those qualities, those ideals to be held by everyone, black, white, blonde, free, Indian. It really didn't matter your gender or your color or your skin. He believed that everyone should have been able to feast off those ideals, and especially those natural rights, liberty, freedom, equality, and justice. I think Mr. Jefferson used a word called the unalienable rights in the Declaration of Independence, which, of course, he set up in his declaration, that we were endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. The only way we got those rights or could have those rights, we had to be endowed, as he said, unalienable. Not a human being can give you these rights. We only can be endowed by our Creator, who is God. It is true. And also in Mr. Paine's pamphlet, the equality, justice, and liberty and freedom, very, very important. Natural rights given to us by God. Every human being is given to us, given us those rights in our souls before we even birth here upon this earth. And we need to protect those rights. And that's what we secured in 1774. We have to work to make sure everybody have these rights, including enslaved and Indians and everybody else. They need to know they have those rights, endowed by those rights. But we also have to protect them, because it took us 6 years of hard-fought, blood battles, war to secure the rights. Now we got to be able to hang on to them. Because just as it had taken us so long to secure those rights, we can lose those rights in a twinkling of an eye. So I am going to deputize you all. I'm going to charge you as sentries, every one of you. Especially if you are Americans, you live in the United States of America, you are now sentries to protect the rights. And make sure you pass the word on to your children, that they have those same rights to protect. Because if we don't protect those rights 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, if we don't secure and protect those rights, we can lose those rights in a twinkling of an eye. So now I have charged you, go out, protect them, but make sure you tell the story. God bless you. May heaven shine upon you until we meet again, and God bless and save these United States of America.
Gentlemen, ladies, thank you for enjoying the program with the Reverend Gowan Pamphlet. This program and all of our programs at Colonial Williamsburg are made possible from viewers and donors just like you.